Showtime! The Capital G show starts right now.
Yu-Gi-Oh! A game that's always changing and ever evolving. New mechanics give birth to constant evolution, and we the players go through this as well, constantly coming up with new strategies and techniques, figuring out new combos, plays, and interactions. This is what keeps us at the height of our competitive game. But have you ever wondered if there have been single cards that force us to play differently, change up the most basic of plays to avoid dangerous interactions and possibly lower risk? Well, today you're in luck because I have made a list just for you. We'll be looking at some of the cards that fundamentally change the way that competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Is played, and just for clarity's sake, we won't be including cards that made us run other cards to counter them, such as Gen Releaser of Rituals or Vanity's Emptiness, but rather ones that affected the fundamentals and the basics of how you played the game of Yu-Gi-Oh!, i.e. the actions, not necessarily including different cards. So without further ado, my name is MegaCapitalG. Welcome to the top 10 cards that fundamentally changed how Yu-Gi-Oh! Is played, the Yu-Gi-Oh! Hierarchy. Number 10, Silent Honor Ark. Let's kick things off with a superb Exceed monster that was largely considered to be one of the gold standards for monster removal during the Zexo era, so much so that it even became standard sometimes to summon your deck's most powerful monsters in defense position to avoid its effects, such as Mecha Phantom Beast Draco Sack, for example. This was never common practice prior to 101's release in Legacy of the Valiants. Number 9, Starlight Road. As much as we hate when it's used against us, mass removal is a godsend. It's what keeps overextension in check because you're less prone to commit everything to the board if you know your opponent could have that one special card that would annihilate all of your resources. And generally speaking, mass removal usually causes huge swings in duels, so those cards are a lot of times used immediately without second thought. Enter Starlight Road, a card designed with the sole purpose of countering mass removal and one that gave you a huge synchro monster for your troubles, causing a momentum swing as large as the card that it negated in the first place. Starlight Road's existence actually made players think about using their mass removal and in many cases hold on to the card completely for fear that they would be severely punished for their attempt to, well, severely punish. That is irony at its highest. Number 8, Denko Seka. I was very tempted to have Genzo co-share the spot, but believe it or not, despite Genzo's incredible prowess when releasing Pharaoh's Servant, people didn't actually change their habits all that much. Denko, on the other hand, was a completely different story. With Heavy Storm's removal for years out of the game, it became extremely popular and almost second nature for players to feel comfortable setting miles of traps. That was until this blue-haired bombshell started hitting decks like wrecking balls and started to have a cold wave-like effect on them. Needless to say, people stopped setting all their spells and traps during their first turn just to convey a strong opening. Number 7, Necros of Trishula. Overextending is generally recognized as something you should avoid doing at all costs. That was before Trishula was given a new lease on life as a powerful ritual monster and one of the most incredible archetypes ever. Necros of Trishula was probably the most feared effect in the entire game, second only to maybe Evil Swarm Exiton Knights, and fear of his devastating effect was so high that duelists would often commit their entire hand to the field just to lock out the potential of getting trished. Necros mirror matches took it a step even further. They would often leave their fields completely vacant so they wouldn't have to deal with opposing Trishulas. All of Yu-Gi-Oh's history told you that these should have been seen as short-sighted and very bad ideas, but the strategies actually paid off and they had respectable levels of success. Number 6, Artifact Morale Attack and Artifact Sanctum. Getting rid of and dealing with back row without a heavy storm has always been somewhat tricky, but never as tricky as when Primal Origin gave us the artifact cards. Attempting to snipe out back row, especially when there were 3 or less cards, was such common practice that people even coined the phrase blind MS-ting. This style of answering back row was not only flipped on its head due to the artifacts, but for a while it was nearly taken out of the game entirely. Hitting an artifact monster generally meant a neg-1, potentially more, and it also gave your opponent a sizable monster that you now had to deal with. Hitting a Sanctum, well, a lot of times that just meant you lost the duel. Number 5, Honest. Who doesn't love battle phase tricks? Unpredictable and almost impossible to counter. Before Ladder Destruction, the battle phase and attacking in general was pretty straightforward. All you had to do was worry about battle traps like Mirror Force, and if your opponent had no back row, you always had the green light to go in on them. But that changed with Honest. Suddenly, every light monster in the game had a potential guardian angel hiding in the hand where spell and trap destruction couldn't touch them, and thus players were much more hesitant to send their prize boss monsters monsters in the battle so fearlessly. Furthermore, since Honest could be used on both players' turns while rare, sometimes you would even see players attacking into higher monsters, bluffing the Honest as it was called, just to see if their gamble would pay off and they could get their opponent to use a battle trap on a monster that would have died anyways. These types of plays prior to Honest would have been considered downright crazy or even suicidal. Number 4, Maxie. Special summoning to spam the board has always been prevalent in Yu-Gi-Oh since the early days of fluidly summoning Dragon into double blue eyes. And when your opponent doesn't have any cards on the field to stop you, i.e. going first in a duel for example, it is second nature to go for broke. The advent of Maxie and Storm of Ragnarok completely changed this dynamic. The more you went off, the more resources your opponent would stockpile, which could be used to counter your play. For the first time ever, players had to actually weigh the risks, think about all the cards their opponent could have to counter them, and they were just put in a very difficult situation with too many variables to even list. Calling Maxie a game changer is an understatement. Number 3, Heavy Storm. For years, this card's existence was the deciding factor on how much back row you would commit to the board at any one time. Commit more and you'd have more answers for your opponent's plays, but would risk losing it all to one card. Commit less and you could find yourself in a position where one card in hand might be desperately needed, but you could lose less resources if your back row got nuked. And of course, there was the Heavy Storm mind games that occurred, often called the Pro Set Storm, where duelists would set their lone copy of the card in attempt to lure their opponent into a false sense of security. Thus, they would overcommit their spells and traps. I guess you could call that setting a trap without even setting a trap. Number 2, Gore's Emissary of Darkness, our second battle phase trick that completely shook up the way that we go about the phase. For years, attacking directly with monsters was something that you did pretty much without thinking. Who attacked first, in what order, it was largely irrelevant 99% of the time. Fast forward to when Gore's was released in the early parts of the 5Ds era and it became relevant 100% of the time. Gore's is one of the biggest momentum swinging cards the game has ever seen, and foolishly attacking with your strongest monster first could mean that you utterly wasted your entire battle phase, or even worse, losing. Post Gores, it immediately became standard to attack lowest to highest in situations where Gores could be summoned. Honorable mentions include Cyber Dragons, Torrential Tribute, and Evil Swarm Exciton Knights, and finally to our numero uno, Mirror Force. And here it is, not only one of Yu-Gi-Oh's most revered traps of all time, but one that had one of the most profound impacts. Even in formats where Mirror Force had seen little to no play, its specter still looms over the battle phase, haunting players, reminding them of times where they went for gold and lost everything to its powerful destruction. Make no mistake, when you see someone switch a monster to defense position right before the battle phase, that is entirely because of Mirror Force, and it has been done for almost 2 decades. And with the recent releases of even more Mirror Force cards, it is pretty apparent that this precaution is just never going to go away. So with a 2-decade legacy, I had to give the top spot to Mirror Force. So what did you guys think of my list? How did I do? Let me know in the comment section below, especially if I missed out on any cards, and tell me in the comment section below what's your favorite card that fundamentally changed how we play the game. Thank you guys for watching as always, and subscribe if you have not already. Subscribing makes life happy.